He never said it out loud, but for a long time Jordan believed some hearts were built to be temporary. Temporary rooms, temporary guardians, temporary promises. For 10 years, that was all he knew. Faces that blurred over time, caseworkers who changed like seasons, and a quiet ache that pressed into his ribs every time he packed his things into another trash bag. 10 years of being told he was resilient, strong, adaptable, as if those were compliments and not a gentle way of saying he'd had to survive more than any kid should. And then somehow, impossibly, he found himself under the bright lights of a game show stage in Atlanta, standing beside the people who had rewritten the meaning of home for him. He didn't expect to cry that day. He definitely didn't expect Steve Harvey to cry. But life has a way of saving its most unforgettable moments for when we least expect them. On the 3rd of December, 2022, the air inside the Family Feud studio buzzed with the kind of excited energy only a live audience can create. People were laughing, chatting, waving signs, ready for the famous music cue and the booming voice of Steve himself. Backstage, the Thompson family was waiting for their turn. They looked like any cheerful group, hoping to win a little cash and make a fun memory. Matching green shirts, inside jokes, playful teasing. Michelle adjusted her husband Robert's collar. Emma and Tyler were arguing over who would get the first question, and in the middle of them was Jordan, 22 years old, quiet but smiling, carrying decades of pain wrapped beneath a warmth. He was still learning to trust. To the outside world, he fit in perfectly. He moved like someone who knew his place, who belonged. But deep inside was a scar shaped like every goodbye he'd ever been forced to say. He'd been placed with the Thompsons at 12 years old, after bouncing from one house to another. They'd been his 13th placement. 13 even now, years later, he could still hear the soft click of doors closing behind him each time he left another home that wasn't really his. When the music swelled and the camera lights hit the stage, Steve Harvey walked out and began working the crowd with that larger-than-life charm. His presence filled the room, as always. He went from family to family until he reached the Thompsons. Robert introduced himself, then Michelle, then the kids. When Steve came to Jordan, he paused the way he sometimes does when his instincts tell him there's more to the story. "How do you fit in with this crew, young man?" Steve asked, tilting his head with that classic playful suspicion. And Jordan, who had rehearsed this moment in the hotel mirror, simply said, "I'm their son, too." It hung in the air a second, a simple sentence, a universe of history behind it. Steve blinked. "Their son, too. So, y'all got 3 kids?" Michelle and Robert exchanged that familiar couple look that communicates whole conversations in silence. Robert cleared his throat. "Jordan is our newest family member officially." "What does that mean?" Steve asked. And that was when everything in the room shifted. Jordan took a slow breath, the kind you take before stepping into something vulnerable and irreversible. "I grew up in foster care," he said. "For 10 years. I moved around a lot. I came to live with the Thompsons when I was 12, and 6 months ago, even though I'm 22, they adopted me." The studio fell so quiet it felt holy. You could have heard a pin drop or maybe even a heartbeat. Steve lowered his mic, the jokes fading away as he stared at the young man who had just handed his heart to the room. "You mean," Steve said softly, "you waited 10 years for a family?" Jordan nodded. 10 years, 12 placements. These were supposed to be temporary too." He looked at the Thompsons. His family, with a kind of gratitude that can't be taught. "But they never sent me back." Michelle stepped forward, her voice shaking but steady. "He had been hurt. He didn't trust anyone at first. But you don't give up on a child, not ever." Jordan half laughed, half swallowed the lump in his throat. "I tested them, a lot. I thought if I acted out, maybe they'd get rid of me before I could get attached, but they didn't budge." Robert nodded. "We told him the first week he came home, 'You can try anything you want, we aren't going anywhere.' And we meant it." Steve was misty, eyed now, wiping at his face. He asked why they waited until Jordan was 22 to adopt him, and Robert's smile faded. "We tried," he said. "We tried when he was 14, but his biological mother wouldn't sign away her rights. We couldn't move forward." Jordan looked down at his hands. "She kept saying she'd come back for me, but she never did. I didn't know how to feel about that for a long time." The audience held its breath. These weren't game show answers. These were truths heavy enough to bend a soul. Then Jordan continued quietly. She passed away last year. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I heard, it still hurt. But it also meant I could finally be adopted. Steve gently asked what that felt like, and Jordan pulled out his wallet with trembling fingers, handing over his driver's license. Steve held it up dramatically. Jordan Matthew Thompson, he read. That's your name now. Jordan nodded, tears spilling freely. It feels like I finally belong somewhere. Steve turned to the audience with more seriousness than he usually ever shows on camera. This young man waited a decade, 10 years, to hear someone say he was theirs forever. Imagine that. Going to sleep every night, wondering if you'd ever have a family. All around the studio, people were wiping their eyes. Even the camera operators were sniffling. Steve wasn't finished. He turned to the Thompsons. Y'all kept him after he aged out of the system, when the state wasn't paying anymore, when most folks would have said, well, we did our part. Why? Robert didn't hesitate. Because he's our son. Paperwork or no paperwork. Michelle added, you don't stop being someone's family just because they turn 18. Older kids deserve homes just as much as little ones. Something inside Steve clearly snapped with that. He turned to the producers. Bring out the prize board, right now. People behind the scenes scrambled. Unsure if he was serious, but they brought it out anyway. Then Steve announced that if the Thompson family won that day, the show would donate $50,000 to the foster organization in Portland that had once handled Jordan's case. So more kids like him could have a chance at belonging. The audience erupted. Tyler slapped Jordan's shoulder. Jordan looked stunned, overwhelmed, almost weightless with gratitude. Then they played. And they didn't just play, they shone. They laughed together, teased each other, whispered strategies, and showed the world what a chosen family looks like in action. Their opponents were good, great even. But the Thompsons played with something deeper than strategy. They played with unity. They played with joy. They played like people who knew exactly who they were to each other. They won fast money with 224 points. When the scoreboard flashed their victory, Jordan didn't jump up or fist pump like most contestants. Instead, he turned and wrapped his arms around Robert and Michelle. It wasn't the kind of hug you give after a game show win. It was the kind of hug that says, thank you for staying. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for making me yours. It was 10 years of love compressed into a single moment. When the episode aired weeks later, it went viral, 50+ million views in days. But more importantly, something extraordinary happened. People started calling their local foster organizations to ask about adopting older kids. The hashtag number #AdoptOlderKids began trending. Families who had once dismissed the idea started reconsidering it. Jordan's story made people believe that love doesn't come with an age limit. That sometimes the greatest families are the ones we choose on purpose. 5 years later, Jordan walked across the graduation stage at Portland State University with a degree in social work. And in the crowd, the loudest cheers came from the 4 people who had rewritten his story: Robert, Michelle, Emma, and Tyler. His real family, his forever family. And that is the heart of his story. That family isn't defined by DNA or timing or the luck of birth. Family is a promise you make every day to show up. Family is the choice to love someone even when loving them takes patience and courage. Family is looking a child, any age in the eyes and saying, you're home. You're ours. You're not going anywhere. If Jordan's story touched you even a little, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button and tap the like. It helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Share this with someone who works in foster care, someone who's adopted, someone who's searching for hope, or someone who needs to be reminded that family comes in more forms than the world sometimes admits. And if you've lived through foster care or adoption, drop your story in the comments. You never know who might feel less alone because of what you share. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another story about the incredible ways we find belonging in this world.